Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Cycling Day YouTube channel. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by my co-host, not Caleb Ewan, and we're going to be discussing the Imola World Championships that basically replaced what was going to happen in Switzerland. But without further ado, here's our history clip as presented by not Caleb Ewan.
The rainbow jersey is one of the most distinctive jerseys in the sport of cycling, marking the current UCI world champion. Bearing the blue, red, black, yellow and green stripes, these colours replicate those of the Olympic rings created by Pierre de Coubertin in 1913 to reflect the 5 continents of the world. Having become tradition since 1927, the year of the first UCI Road World Championships, Alfredo Binda received the first ever rainbow jersey. There are only a few riders in the elite list of triple rainbow jersey winners. They are Alfredo Binda, Eddy Merckx, Rik van Steenbergen, Oscar Freire, and of course, Peter Sagan. Joop Zoetemelk of the Netherlands is the oldest winner of the rainbow jersey, winning the World Championships in 1985 at the age of 38. On the other end of the spectrum, the Belgian Karel Kers was the youngest winner of the rainbow jersey at the age of 20 years old. After originally being scheduled to be held in Switzerland this year near the UCI's HQ, the town of Imola stepped up to the plate to host the championships that will award the best rider in the world the most beautiful jersey in our sport.
So, Ewan, you've watched a lot of World Championships. It's kind of like classics racing in a way. The race is always like over 250 kilometers, but it's so unique because this is the one day of the year, well, one day of every year, apart from the Olympic year, where they also have a second day, but where trade teammates become enemies as they ride under the nation flags instead of their trade teams. But which kind of World Championships have stood out for you in the last few years?
Yeah, first off, it's a wildly unique event, and that's why it sticks in my memory a lot more than other ones. And of course, with the distinctive jersey at the end of it. For me, one of the best ones has to be last year, 2019 World Championships. You couldn't have written that race at all. Mads Payson winning it, Mathieu van der Poel blowing up in the final lap of racing, and Italy's massive blunder there. It was a very, very exciting race to watch. And with the dramatic weather conditions in Harrogate, Yorkshire, that made for a very cinematic race. 2015 World Championships as well. That whole World Championships week was absolutely brilliant. The race round Richmond with the cobble climbs, the late finishes for us in Europe really made for a special World Championships, where we saw Sagan take his first of his 3 iconic victories.
I was at the last 2 championships. First of all, at Innsbruck, which for me was absolutely amazing with Hurl, 28% climb. And then, of course, last year, Mads Pedersen, I was there as well. But unfortunately, I actually left half an hour before he crossed the line. Or actually an hour before, because it was a really wet day and it was not fun to be watching that race. And we had to hear it on the radio on the way back. Yeah, that was a bit, well, if we'd stayed, maybe he wouldn't have won. So whatever. But yeah, Mads Pedersen winning was truly amazing for Denmark as well. He was the first Danish male world champion. Of course, we have had Dieriksen. She's also won, of course. She won in Qatar. But anyways, looking at the history of, you just gave a bit of an introduction, but we have this notion of this curse of the rainbow jersey. That's something which is very synonymous with the jersey itself. And we'll talk through some of the examples we have as well. And we'll also hear from world champion as well, former world champion, Juan Museo. So do you think there is a curse of the rainbow jersey, essentially?
There's definitely a correlation. If we look back, Rui Costa won the World Championships 2013, 2014, and very, very few wins. I believe it's in single figures. Then he had bronchitis at the Tour de France and missed out a lot of the season. Philippe Gilbert in 2012 won the Worlds. 2013 wasn't a great season for the Belgian, and ever since then it's been having mixed fortunes. If we look back, we can see Stephen Roach, who got the iconic Triple Crown, had an awful season in the rainbow jersey, where he was injured with a knee injury, missed out on many of the races back in 1988. That was his rainbow year. And Freddie Mertens of Belgium as well wore the green jersey at the 1981 Tour de France before winning the jersey that year. But in 1982, he didn't win a single race, which lingers over his career. So I think it's gained a fair reputation of being quite a cursed jersey. It's very hard to replicate the feat of becoming world champion and being on such incredible form, having the top level results. So that does weigh on people in terms of pressure and the reputation that they garner being a world champion.
Yeah, like some of the examples you touched on there as well. You also have like the tragic case of the 22-year-old Belgian world champion, Jean-Pierre Museo, who actually died wearing the World Championships jersey only in the March. So following the following year that he actually wore it. Really talented rider. He actually won Giro de Lombardia as well. So he's probably like biggest curse in a way because he actually lost his life. Rudy Danans, Belgium as well. Well, no results the following year, but he also had to stop cycling because he had a heart condition. But anyways, don't listen to us. Here's Johan Museo on his experience of the curse of the rainbow jersey. The next year, wearing the rainbow jersey, did you feel extra pressure? And what do you think of the curse of the rainbow jersey?
Yeah, there was always pressure around me, and especially if you won the World Cup jersey, there's more pressure. But yeah, I have already pressure before because I was alone in Belgium, so I have to defend the cause in Belgium, and I have to win. I have to do everything. But as a world champion, yeah, they expect more from you, and you have to win everything. And yeah, that year I didn't won a monument, so I was in the breakaway in Flanders, and I have a crash. And in Roubaix, I was in the breakaway with André Schmila, Moncassin, and I have a puncture the last section. So that was bad luck. It was not really, my condition was not okay, but I have just bad luck that weeks. But I won 15 races that year as a World Cup, as a World Cup winner.
Just listening to Museo there, he just said that there was a lot of pressure being the world champion, and maybe having this target on your back is also kind of the reason why this curse kind of that the riders feel a lot more pressure and maybe won't perform as they used to.
Yeah, definitely. I think he raises a good point in the fact that you do pretty much have a target on your back. And I think that having the rainbow jersey does have a whole attitude surrounding it where you do have to win everything because you're in the special jersey. You have the title of being the best in the world, quote unquote. And it does place a lot of pressure on you. And even if you have a very average season, like Valverde, we don't really think of him as being exceptionally awful or exceptionally incredible in the rainbow jersey. He was just himself, finishing second at the Vuelta last year. That almost goes down as being lackluster in a way because you have the title of being the world's best rider.
Anyways, this year's World Championships and this really strange season that we're having is no longer in Switzerland. We are in Imola, which is in the Emilia-Romagna region. But yeah, Ewan, what's the course like, and what's kind of the highlights? And is it a classic World Championships course in your eyes?
This is a paint-by-numbers World Championship route, 259 kilometers long, 9 laps of a course. We have some hills, and then we have a downhill to flat finish. We start around the racetrack of Imola. It's the racetrack that sadly we lost Ayrton Senna, the Brazilian motor driver, on. But we leave the circuit, we head out to the town of Riolo Terme, the spa town, and we have 2 climbs on course. The Matolano climb, 2.8 kilometers at 6%, with the first kilometer being an average of 10%. Then we have the Cima Gallisterna climb, 2 kilometers at 6%, with a very, very steep 14% section in it. We crest the Cima Gallisterna with 12 kilometers to go before the line. From then on, it's downhill and flat towards the finish in Imola. Entering that course will be very technical. It is still a race circuit. There are some big, wide, sweeping corners. But if it's slippery, this may be quite interesting because these are long corners on very, very well-paved roads that don't take the rain very well. And currently, as we are recording this, there is a 40% chance of rain right now on Sunday's men's elite road race. So this is really a typical World Championship route that we didn't expect to see a couple of weeks back, but it's definitely going to bring out a classic World Championship race and one that will resonate with many of the viewers.
So that neatly moves us on to the teams of this year. Of course, all the riders are riding for their respective countries now. And this route, of course, is very different from last year, which was more of a classics kind of a hard man. Well, it turned out to be a more of a hard man circuit with that weather as well. But like as you just outlined, it is more of a climbers circuit this, and we were expecting a climbers circuit on the Switzerland course. But yeah, it's also reflected in the teams as well. Like many of these teams, the bigger nations, they have like a plethora of riders to choose from, and we can definitely see they've kind of tuned their teams to this kind of course. Like just looking at Denmark, we have no Mads Pedersen on the start line. Yeah, which teams kind of stand out for you right now?
Yeah, just to touch on the fact that Mads Pedersen isn't here, this is quite a weird lineup being announced. Germany don't have Ackermann. Van der Poel is not being fielded for the Netherlands. Neither has Christopher Bosenhagen been fielded for Norway. And Slovakia, I believe, there are rumors that Peter Sagan is not even going to be at the start line of this World Championships. So it is a little bit weird. This new completely rescheduled season has thrown the World Championships up in the air. Many people thought that they weren't going to be happening at all a couple of weeks back. But now it's back in the schedule, halfway between the Tour and the Giro, which puts it in quite an awkward position for people going to both races. And we can see that in the start list. But for me, some of the big teams, we have to look at the usual cycling powerhouses. France, for example, they're bringing Julian Alaphilippe, the former champion of La Classicissima. He is here alongside a pretty strong field with many riders coming fresh from the Tour de France. In fact, all of them, apart from Julien Bernard, started the Tour de France. We have a stage winner in Nance Peters, a very, very good rider on his day that has the rouleur-esque ability about him. Quentin Pache, fantastic team riders. We saw that with both Brian Coquin and Pierre Rolland at the Tour de France. And also the man I think that will be their wild card, Valentin Madouas. Really, really good record for him back at the Classics in 2019. I'm thinking of Amstel Gold, which is a fairly similar course to this. Lots of similar steep climbs and a flat-ish finish. So Valentin Madouas could be someone that France stir up. But Julien Alaphilippe, very, very talented rider on his day, a decent sprinter. And that's the thing. We do have 12 kilometers of flat and downhill towards the finish. So we do have to think about it being more of an able sprinter as well as someone who can get over the climbs. And that's where I think we have to bring in Australia into this, because they're bringing an exceptional team around the man who just won the Grand Prix de Bretagne, Michael Matthews of Sunweb. He has a brilliant chance on this kind of course. It looks similar to the one at the Bretagne Classic and of many other stages that he's won in the past. It's hilly, but ultimately it could end in a sprint. Matthews is a very tough guy. He's on pretty good form right now. And the team around him, Simon Clark, a very able climber and puncher. He managed to get a very good finish at Amstel Gold last year. He's contended in Giro finishes like this. Third place at Tour de France, Richie Porte, alongside many guys as well, like Damien Housen and Luke Durbridge, who can do the work in the flat for Michael Matthews. And this is a team with a Mitchelton backbone to it, which was a team that he rode for many, many years. So I can see Michael Matthews really contending for this Rainbow Bands.
Yes, okay, so I'll just mention the two countries that kind of stand out for me. Obviously, Denmark, I'm going to say Denmark stand out. We're hoping that Jakob Fuglsang is going to defend the title of Mads Pedersen, but we'll have to see about that. In the squad supporting him, we've got Niklas E, who was on the lockdown interview, of course, but also just recently finished his first ever Tour de France. Jonas Gregor, who is a teammate of Jakob Fuglsang. Mikkel Honoré, who's at Deceuninck Quickstep, who's doing really well. Christopher Juhl Jensen, the Mitchelton Scott rider, who's very strong. Kasper Petersen, who also just completed his first Tour de France. Jesper Hansen of Coveted and Mikael Valgren also. So like it's a strong squad. If they're all on form and they can get around like Jakob Fuglsang, and it looks like if Niklas E and Gregor or Honoré can stay there in like the later laps, then perhaps something could happen. But equally, I'm going to talk about Colombia. Colombia look like they have an insane team if you look at it. Chavez, if he was on form, he was nowhere in the Tour de France, unfortunately. Sergio Higuita, Sergio Henao, Miguel Angel Lopez, Daniel Martinez, Nairo Quintana, Harold Tejada, Rigoberto Urán. All of these guys were at the Tour de France. Well, not Sergio Henao. But yeah, like phenomenal team. Like, but is it too many chefs in the kitchen? That's the thing as well. And like, can they do this? Or
personally, I think that Colombia's been pretty underwhelming in World Championships in previous years. They've always come in with a pretty packed start list. especially 2018, that climbers course in Innsbruck, they didn't contend at all. And the Colombians just never seem to be cohesive when it comes to the World Championships. And that is shown in the results that they have. They've never been on the podium. Well, they haven't been on the podium in the last 10 years, I don't believe, in the senior races. Sergio Henao, for me, is the man who could probably get the best result on this type of course. Henao is a really, really good puncher on his day. But the team, not many of them ride together on their trade teams. And I know that they flew over to Europe hand in hand. But it feels like a mix and match team. We don't have Gaviri, we don't have Hodge, or these kind of guys to maybe contest a sprint. It is just all these cooks in the kitchen, but the cooks that are in the kitchen are all climbers. We don't have any variation, and we need a 3-course meal to continue this metaphor in order for Colombia to take the win. We need a climber, we need a rouleur, and we need a sprinter probably for them to take the win. And that doesn't look quite so good. Denmark, on the other hand, as you mentioned, I think Jakob Fuglsang isn't going to have his day. I think it's not hard enough for the Dane. But there are lots of hills. This looks like the 2013 course, which did end up with punchers, but I don't think it's hilly enough for Fuglsang. I think we're going to have to look towards Kasper Payson, potentially, for Denmark's best finish. And an on-form Mikael Valgren could easily get a top 10 in this. He got a top 10 in last year's race. That was one of the very few things for him to write home about in 2019. But if Mads Payson was here, it might be a different story. But for Denmark, they're missing Asgreen. He would have been such a good wild card, such a good engine for Jakob Fuglsang, in my opinion. He's going to be there at the time trial, so I don't understand why he couldn't do the road race. But Denmark, I still think that they could disrupt things. They've been really, really good in the past couple of weeks. I feel ashamed that Søren Kragh Andersen is not on the start list as well. Another very, very good puncher. And I'm sure many people will be bewildered or bamboozled by that decision following his 2-stage victories at the Tour de France. So Denmark, it's an interesting lineup, but they could be a nuisance. I wouldn't put a top 10 past them.
We're going to look through the biggest teams that we have right now. But if we look at the current defending Tour de France nation, we have a very interesting lineup. Primož Roglic, Tadej Pogačar, Jan Tratnik, Luka Mezgic, Brajkovic, who won the Dauphiné in front of Alberto Contador and absolutely destroyed Contador, Jan Polanc. It's a really strong team. But I feel, maybe, like you said, is it not enough? Like, if it was the Innsbruck course, this team could have maybe done well. We still have 5,000 meters of elevation to cover, so you must admit that it is a climber's course. I wouldn't expect to see a sprinter at the finish.
It looks like an attritional course, like 2013, but they might not race it like that. A lot of these riders are coming fresh out the Tour de France. Usually for the World Championships, they come from the Welter, and not everyone has ridden the Welter, so they're not tired from that racing. They've just come from 3 weeks of racing in France to this race. A lot of them will be going for the Giro as well. This was supposed to be their period of relaxation, and they don't have that anymore. But Slovenia, the perfect example of having a 3-course meal in your team lineup. We have Luka Mezgic as the sprinter, 2 top threes at the Tour de France, both incidentally the stages that Søren Kragh Andersen won. Jan Tratnik, someone to roll on the flats. Jan Polanc, someone that they could roll on the early part of the day, worked with Pogačar at the Tour de France. Luka Pivonik, a very good sprinter. And we can't look past the double act of Roglic and Tadej Pogačar. Roglic could go long. We don't know if he's recovered from La Planche de Belfi. That must have been a massive blow to his confidence after what was a humiliating day potentially for him. And Pogačar must be buzzing, but it seems a little bit too much of an ask. But let's not forget, he won the sprint into La Reims on stage 9 at the Tour de France. He does have a decent kick on his day. So don't put it past Pogačar if this ends up in a small group sprint. But he is still buzzing from the Tour de France. And from how that went, he might be partying a little bit too hard in this week and put on a kilo or two, or maybe doesn't get enough sleep to contend the World Championships.
So the home nation of Italy, they're famous for kind of imploding at the World Championships, and it was seen as a miracle that Mario Cipollini won. But yeah, of course, they're headed up by, I would say, Vincenzo Nibali and Diego Ulissi. Ulissi, who's done really well lately. He won the Tour of Luxembourg. And you've also got the defending Tour of Flanders winner in there, Alberto Bettiol, and Damiano Caruso, who kind of swept into the top 10 under many people's radar. So I would say that's a really strong team, but I do think they're going to try and do whatever they... what do you think of their team?
Well, Italy, it's a fantastic lineup. Let's just preface this by saying that it's not confirmed. We only have the Italian long list, which is filled with talent. And Baioli, who won a stage of the Tour de l'Ain, is a very, very decent puncher on his day. Brambilla, Bettiol, Conchi, Nibali, these are all fantastic punchers. And a lot of them have links to Nibali, let's not forget. Visconti, Caruso, and Nibali are all from Sicily. They all grew up racing together and alongside each other. I believe they reunited at Bahrain for a bit. Brambilla and Conchi now ride alongside Nibali at Trek Segafredo. They've done some of those classic races together. Nibali didn't look great at Tirreno Adriatico, but I think we have to look past that. And one rider who I think does look very good is Fausto Masnada. Really, really talented puncher and climber. He won a Giro stage last year. He looked very strong at Tirreno Adriatico. And Italy, sometimes they can throw up someone that you don't expect in the finale. We saw that the European Championships a couple of years back, we had, I think it was Imola who was up near the front, instead of it being someone else from that very, very talented lineup. And even last year, it was Moscon who was up towards the front for Italy, not the kind of players that we were thinking of. Italy usually are up there in numbers, and as well with this being a home race, they might go full out for this, especially as many of these riders are going for the Giro. I'm talking about Nibali, Ulissi, Masnada. These guys are aiming to the Giro, so everything seems to be pinning towards Nibali, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was one of these other guys that ends up going for a top 10 place.
And we also have Spain, of course, and Spain have the evergreen Alejandro Valverde, who's been on the podium 7 times, and last time was, of course, in 2018 in Innsbruck, where he won said title. But do you not think, well, maybe not a 40-year-old Alejandro Valverde, but maybe a few years ago, a 38-year-old Valverde would have just absolutely loved this course. He's a good descender, and he has like over 100 wins, which is so unusual for a climber. And it's, of course, that he has this sprinting ability as well. So he is this weird anomaly, basically, in cycling. Do you see anything from Spain? They've got Bilbao on the start, Marc Soler, Enrique Mas, who got a top 10 in the Tour de France, Luis Leon Sanchez, David de la Cruz, Jesus Herrera. Like, they've all come from the Tour de France. So, again, is a week enough to recover from the Tour de France? That's another thing that we haven't really spoke about. It was a hard Tour de France by the accounts that we've heard. So is it going to be a rider that hasn't been riding the Tour de France, like Fuglsang, who's going to take the win?
Not just Fuglsang, Michael Matthews and also Vincenzo Nibali and Fausto Masnada, they all haven't done the Tour de France. If we look back at San Sebastian, that Basque classic, it usually throws up a bizarre, unforeseen top 3 because the riders from the Tour de France come in very, very tired. It's the race that Remco Evenepoel won last year, where we saw Mark Hirschi on the podium. Bauke Mollema's won it before. Tony Galopin has contended. These are guys that we don't think would win one-day races like this, especially in comparison to the likes of Julian Alaphilippe, Alejandro Valverde, and so forth, who usually target the Tour de France. But this year, it's after a very, very tough and nasty Tour de France, and also a really packed season. Lots of people went from doing Tour de Landstrade, Criterium du Dauphiné, then Tour de France. It's been a month and a half of complete racing from start to finish, and it's probably going to take its toll on many people. Spain, I think, is a team that will be very fatigued, and they haven't been fielding the best of results. I believe everyone on this team has come from the Tour de France. So Valverde, with his blunder on the final day of the Tour de France, I don't know where he's going to finish. I can't read Valverde all that well anymore. Well, he seemed to be rolling decent at the Tour de France without anybody noticing, but he also didn't show himself. He didn't have the results and the kick that we associate Valverde with. So on this team, I'm gonna put it out there. and say that David de la Cruz is going to be the best rider for Spain, who could contend for a top 5 finish. He's been very, very good in the last week of the Tour de France, showing very good legs. And also the final day on La Planche des Belles Filles shows that he's still got it in him to contend on this. And looking back at old David de la Cruz from 2016, 17, 18, he likes a day like this. And if it gets wet and tough, it is de la Cruz's sort of terrain.
So we haven't really spoken about Belgium as well, but looking at their squad, they have a generally insane team. Tim Wellens, Greg Van Avermaet, Wout van Aert, Oliver Naassen, Thijs Benoot. It's like all-stars classics. And if it starts raining as well, so gets a bit like Northern Europe conditions, maybe. Like this is the team that we should be looking at for the rainbow jersey. And of course, we all know Wout van Aert did absolutely phenomenal in the Tour de France. And he also is the current Milan-San Remo champion and Strade Bianche champion. So do you think that they're going to unite behind the young Wout van Aert?
Well, my alliances seem to be clear here with the Lion of Flanders. I'm hoping for Wout van Aert to take the men's senior rainbow jersey. He's taken the cyclocross one before. But here on the road, I think he deserves it. He's been the best rider since the season's restart. I know Pogacar won the Tour de France, but Wout van Aert had a rate of, I think, 35% stage victories for a while when he finished in first place in stage 7 of the Tour de France. And he has been unstoppable. The one thing holding him back on his trade team is the fact that they've been going for GC as well. And if we look at the kind of stages Wout van Aert has contended on, it's been on all terrain. And I've been pretty clear in the fact that I'm unsure of whether this is going to be a climber's race, a puncheur's race, or a sprinter, or a more hardy sprinter like Matthews kind of terrain. And Wout van Aert can do all of those territories. So he is sorted. And he's one of the very few people on this Belgian team that is strong enough at all those to contend a final. Van Avermaet as well is pretty decent, but he's not as good of a climber as Wout van Aert, who, let's not forget, did contend on La Planche des Belles Filles in the time trial, towed everyone up Le Grand Colombier. He's a very, very decent rider, and he doesn't mind the bad weather, as we've seen before. And the kind of people around him, yeah, they're very strong, but Belgium have a tendency to not make it work at the World Championship road race. Similar recipe for disaster as Colombia, where not many of them will ride together. They're big hitters on their own teams, and it's ego versus ego. And we haven't seen Belgium take a rainbow jersey since Philippe Gilbert back in 2012. With the prestige of riders from that country, we'd expect more. But Wout van Aert is someone who has had to do it on his own in the past couple of weeks, whilst his whole team of climbers around him look out for Primož Roglič. So Wout van Aert, this is going to be very comfortable territory for him. And he's done it before. He's won in the Belgian jersey at the Cyclocross World Championships. So why can't he do it at the Road World Championships? That's all I'm going to say.
Last year, we actually were looking at another 3-time world cyclocross champion as the favorite. And that was, of course, Mathieu van der Poel, who isn't going to be here by the looks of it. But everyone was so certain after his imperious performances in the Tour of Britain a few weeks before. And he absolutely looked so dominant. And then it was just the weather or not eating properly that kind of, he was in the move that took the World Championships. And we all thought, like, even Danish people, when they were watching it, Van der Poel's going to take this and hopefully Mads Pedersen gets second. But yeah, then I think that was one of the shocks of the season last year, that he popped. He was kind of the star of the season without winning a Grand Tour, of course, but he had this amazing winning record. Like Amstel Gold was one of the best finishes to a race I've ever seen. So yeah, I don't know if the pressure, of course, Wout van Aert used to pressure. Like, of course, he's been the world champion in cyclocross as well. He hasn't actually been to the world championships in the senior ranks on the road, so that'll be different for him as well. And yeah, I think you're right. The biggest obstacle for Belgium might be Belgium themselves.
Let's rewind to stage 19 of this year's Tour de France de Champagnole, where we had a lot of these riders in a group, not working together, not being cohesive. I know that they were in trade teams then, but that sort of indicates the rivalry that many of these riders have. And if we look back at the previous World Championships where they should have been up there, I'm thinking about the one in 2017, even 2015. I know that's a long time ago, but Van Avermaet was one of the hot favorites coming into it, and they didn't seem to work quite so well. And that was in a route that was designed like a Belgian cobble classic. This year, it's very, very different, but Wout van Aert has been with the team at the European Championships before, in Glasgow back in 2018, where he finished third behind Van der Poel and Trentin. So he has been up here on the road representing his nation. This is going to be very, very different, of course. And Belgium, it's just a lot of egos. And if you have a lot of egos, not all of them are going to work. Seri and Loic Vliegen are the only ones I see offering up everything they have in service of everybody else. Otherwise, this team is going to be its own downfall, and we're going to see everyone looking at each other in the blue of Belgium.
So there are, of course, other nations. We've talked about the big nations, but are there any outsiders there are some of these smaller nations that have big riders but don't have a lot of support. Like we've seen with Peter Sagan, he has managed to win several World Championships titles despite not having the domestiques around him. Is there a rider that you can see in this start list?
Well, I'm going to go out there and say that we might have a North American contender, and it could come from Canada. The man who looked in such good form at Tirreno Adriatico, Michael Woods, is up here for Canada and could really, really contend. He had a fabulous performance at the 2018 Worlds in Innsbruck, and he looks to be back at top level. He's contended on hilly courses before, and he's still got a kick to get rid of everybody else. And his sprint at the end is not too bad in itself. The team supporting him includes Guillaume Boivin, a decent helper. He's been around for a while. Cataford as well on the same team as Boivin, and a future teammate of Michael Woods at Israel Startup Nation, as well as Hugo Ull, who just came from the Tour de France. Without many people noticing, he had a pretty decent race in support of their team leader, Miguel Angel Lopez, finishing at a fairly decent point in the general classification for someone that we never would have expected to be in the top 50 of that race at all. So Canada is a team that I am excited to watch at the weekend. I don't know if 4 people is too little on this kind of race, especially as Woods will be down to his final teammate very, very early on in comparison to Italy and to France. But he doesn't have that much team support at EF in the classics anyway. So he's probably used to this style of racing, and he will be next year at the Israeli team. But is there anybody else for you that's standing out?
Well, yeah, the guy we both really shunned to after his Tour de France performances and Criterium du Dauphiné performances, like Sepp Kuss from the US. We have Rui Costa on the start list as well, who has, of course, won the World Championship the last time we were in Italy. But Tom Squinch came second on the Tour de France on one of the stages, the stage that Ilno Sakarin, of course, threw away in many people's eyes, including ours. We have the Polish team as well, Michał Kwiatkowski.
Yeah, it's a lot of these smaller teams, the smaller nations that we don't think of, still have decent riders. The Swiss team, I think, is a team that's bringing a 3-course meal yet again, as they have Albacini, the veteran who can offload his insights for Mark Hirschi, a rider that was fantastic at the Tour de France. He did crash, we know. But if he's recovered, this is the kind of stage where Mark Hirschi could contend. He's still a good climber. He's got a very good kick and sprint to him. If his form at the Tour de France is anything to go by, it should be good. And also, we're going to see Enrico Gasparotto, the former Amstel Gold winner, in the Swiss colours for the first time, I believe, at the World Championships.
Who do you think will win this year's title, and who do you think will be the podium?
This is an awful lot of pressure, and it's really hard to predict. As I said, I don't know how this race is going to end up. If we can't pick the same people, I'm going to go for the obvious man. The man from Belgium himself, Wout van Aert, I think, will win this. He can overcome all the barriers to victory that we set for Belgium, I believe. I'm going to say second place will in fact go to Juan Alaphilippe, just like at La Classicissima, where they finished first and second. And I think third will go to Michael Woods of Canada.
So I'm going to go a bit more with my heart, and I'm going to say that Jakob Fuglsang is going to be the second ever Dane to win the rainbow jersey for the men's elite road race, of course. And yeah, why not? Let's say Nairo in second, because that would be funny. And Alejandro Valverde third. That won't happen, but yeah, why not? So anyways, thank you for joining. This is kind of a road race show. Make sure to tune back in for our time trial show as well, which will be coming out basically tomorrow.